executive.
Government executive.
Government executive.
Government executive. Government executive.
Government executive.
Government executive.
Up Close, Conversations with Federal Leaders is underwritten by Tableau.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're excited to have you with us for this installment of Up Close, Conversations with Federal Leaders. I'm Frank Conkel, Executive Editor at NextGov. Before we begin, I just wanted to thank our series underwriter Tableau for helping spotlight these important discussions. Today, I'm excited to introduce Melissa Conley. She's the Senior Advisor for Requirements and Capability Analysis at TSA. Melissa, thanks for being here. To get started, I just want to have you elaborate a little bit on your role at TSA and what your office is up to.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. So, like you said, I'm the Senior Advisor for Requirements and Capability Analysis at TSA. And so what our office is responsible for is for each segment of screening. What we do is we develop the capabilities for, on-person screening, for accessible property screening. And then we also have an innovation task force too that works on a lot of the innovative technologies with industry. And we also have risk analysis functions and then human performance functions. So we bring together all of the technologies at the TSA checkpoints and check baggage areas and make sure that we're innovating along the way, along with industry.
Gotcha. Now, I think many in our audience are familiar with TSA, but perhaps it's always good to provide a general overview of what the mission is and how the agency interacts with really millions of customers and passengers on an annual basis.
Yeah, so TSA's got a big mission. Pre-COVID, we interacted with 2.5 million passengers a day. Right now, our landscape is a lot different than that. We're seeing close to 800 to 900,000 passengers a day, which is about 40% of who we saw in the past. We've got 2,200 screening lanes across 450 airports, and we're responsible for ensuring the safety of those passengers throughout their journey in the airport.
You teed it up really easy for me, but COVID is the top of mind for really everyone right now, and it sounds like you guys have been, as an agency, impacted as much as any. So, can you walk me through? I know you were part of the agency's COVID task force. Can you walk us through some of what's changed for passengers at various 450 airports across the country since COVID, and what we might expect here in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had the pleasure of working on the task force here at TSA, and so in March we immediately started breaking down each segment of the screening process. And so the questions that we were asking ourselves were, how could we make a more touchless, cleaner environment for our officers as well as the passengers who are traversing through the checkpoint. And so the screening experience looks a lot different after our efforts. The first thing we did was take a look at all of our procedures. And so we changed, we did a full-scale change on our procedures, from things like allowing passengers to carry on 12 ounces of hand sanitizer, ensuring that our officers were wearing the proper PPE, face masks, face shields, making sure that our officers were changing their gloves every 30 minutes. We put out additional communications to the passengers to remind them to take off bulky jewelry, take off, belts that cause alarms, and remove food items from their accessible property bags. We built some structural things to create some separation from passengers and our officers. So we deployed acrylic shield barriers at our high touch point locations. So when an officer is taking a look at your ID, there is an acrylic shield barrier. When you're walking up to divest your baggage, there's an acrylic shield barrier. And those are to make sure that we're maintaining that space between passengers. and our officers. Other things that we did is we advanced some technology. We rotated what's called our credential authentication technology to make sure that passengers can self-service, so they can walk up, insert their ID into the machine versus handing it over to an officer. And so we also came up with a full-sail cleaning standard for officers and for janitorial services programs in airports. And so broke down each segment of screening to make sure that we were cleaning all high-touch areas, and that things were sanitized properly.
Now, the authentication technology was particularly interesting to me because as not a frequent traveler during COVID, but I've made a few trips out of Reagan, and I thought that was really interesting. I hadn't even seen that before, but instead of having to physically hand items over like your driver's license or whatnot, your passport, to the screening agent, it was actually kind of cool to see how that process worked. What I'm struck by, though, is that these are fairly significant changes to the screening process, and you guys were able to implement them pretty quickly. I mean, as far as we're familiar with the trope that government bureaucracy works slowly, but you guys have done these changes pretty quickly. Do we expect? How did you do that? I mean, did you have a lot of buy-in from the top leadership on these kinds of things? And then secondly to that, do we expect a lot of these COVID-related changes to stick around or evolve further in the near future as we hopefully come out of this?
Yeah, absolutely. So we did work really quickly. And I think what enabled us to do that was we were reporting straight to the top. So Administrator Prokosky was behind every move that we made and supported all of the ideas and, things that we put in place. And so we were able to do that very quickly. With the acrylic shield barriers, that procurement was a significant procurement. And so we were able to leverage some streamlined acquisition processes in order to get those procured and deployed into the field. And so that was unique to the COVID situation. As far as the enduring initiatives that we've put in place and what's going to last, I think a lot of our technology enhancements that we put in place, such as reducing false alarm rates for on-person screening, because we don't want to touch anyone that we don't necessarily have to, and so our pat down rate has been significantly reduced since the algorithms were deployed into the field, and so we're going to build that type of thinking and that type of technology into the future of all of our technologies. So we're taking a look at, just reduced touch, cleaner environment, and a more socially distanced environment as we move forward in procuring new technology.
And just as being an objective observer going through airports, it doesn't seem like anyone's complaining about those changes either. It's like those are good common sense changes that benefit the passenger experience, which I know is an important thing for you guys. I want to get into some technology discussion here. So one of the technologies that's really relevant to TSA right now of late is biometrics. So TSA has been sort of a leader in employing this technology over the last few years. Can you give us an overview of biometric technology, sort of what that means and how you guys are using that to, meet the mission demands that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. So our biometrics journey has been really exciting at TSA, and we have done a ton with biometrics. And so the primary use for TSA in biometrics is for validating the identity of the passengers that we are about to screen. And so that's really important because we need to ensure that you are who you say you are, because those records go back to our secure flight database, and then that's what enables us to give you the proper type of screening. So we can tell that you're a pre-check passenger, you're a standard passenger, or you may even be a more high-risk passenger. And so TSA has taken kind of two approaches to biometrics. One is what you saw at DCA when you went through the checkpoint, and that is adding a camera to our credential authentication technology where a passenger is stepping up to the technology, they're inserting their driver's license. We are taking that information, and then that passenger poses for a photo. That photo is then matched to the driver's license to ensure that there is a match between the person standing in front of the camera and the ID that was presented to the office. And so that is one-to-one biometric recognition that we're deploying and taking a look at DCA. The second thing that we're taking a look at is in coordination with Customs and Border Protection. And this is a one-to-N biometric capability. And so the difference between that is that Customs and Border has the ability to build a gallery of photos based off of, State Department passport photos that they've got on record. And so what CBP can do for us and has been doing for us, it's live in Atlanta, and it's been live in Atlanta for over a year now, is build a gallery of our pre-check passengers. So all that person has to do is walk up to the checkpoint, pose for a photo, and that photo is matched to that gallery that's been pre-staged for that day. The algorithm matches if there is a match, and that passenger is free to go into the security check.
Well, there are a lot of pros there, right? It in theory should expedite the time it takes for people to get on board, get through the screening process. And in security purposes, right? It's great. I mean, I remember a couple of years back when you guys were beginning to employ some biometric measures at certain airports that they actually were able to catch some people who were coming from overseas that shouldn't have been, or at least weren't who they said they were, right? As you alluded to earlier. So there's a security element there too. On the other side of the coin, there's people get skittish around the term biometrics sometimes as a privacy concern. How do you guys balance that concern with having this kind of more seamless passenger experience?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So we take privacy very, very, very seriously. And so what we do before we deploy any kind of biometric technology, well, first of all, let me take a step back. All of our biometric authentication is voluntary. So we've got an opt-out process. Is if a passenger doesn't feel comfortable going through a biometric technology that we've deployed, then we can do a manual resolution on that passenger. And so it's optional, first of all. But then second of all, we do a privacy impact analysis on every single technology that we deploy. That is posted publicly, so it gives all of the information on how the technology works, what the retention is of the photos, et cetera, et cetera. And then we also make sure that we deploy, when we're doing these pilots, proper signage, and then our officers are armed to answer any questions that a passenger has if they come in, if they encounter any of this biometric technology.
So there's a long public process that goes into this, right? We see those rules come out, and the public has a chance to weigh in, right? And in industry as well, because a lot of times when you're building these kind of capabilities, it's industry that is doing some of the legwork on the infrastructure side of it. So I want to turn, since we're talking about technologies here, let's talk about some of the emerging technologies that are out there, like artificial intelligence and automation, for example. How is TSA looking at employing, either currently or perhaps in the near future, some of these technologies that are coming to bear in the market now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a good use case for machine learning is with our computed tomography systems. And so these are our next generation accessible properties. So what screens your baggage technology. And what that technology does is it's got, advanced algorithms, it's got a 360 view into your bag versus the 2D view that we've got today. And so we've been using machine learning to train those algorithms to detect prohibited items such as guns and knives, And so in theory, eventually what we hope to do is, instead of an officer having to take a look at every single bag that is coming through a checkpoint, which can be, we typically see 2.5 million people a day times 2 bags. Instead of them having to take a look at every single one of those images, we can train these algorithms to auto detect the prohibited items versus having someone take a look at it.
Well, huge. I mean, that could save a ton of time. All right. I think that's the most common. That's the most common experience that passengers recall when they go through TSA. Right? Is either taking the shoes off, putting the stuff through the machines, I guess, and waiting and hoping, crossing their fingers like I usually do, that I don't have to go through one of those situations where they pat me down and also go through my stuff, which it happens about half the time for me because I'm dumb and I always forget that I have liquid or whatever in my backpack. And sort of prep for this call too, you mentioned another technology that I don't know if it's being implemented yet, but is related to COVID, and that was around UV, right? Can you discuss that one? Because I think that might be an interesting one for our audience as well.
Germicidal UVC is something that is new to us. We were approached by a couple of our automated screening lane manufacturers, and those are the manufacturers that do the bin return systems. And so, as part of our COVID response, we developed the cleaning standard, and the cleaning standard called for hourly cleaning of our checkpoint bins. And so, instead of deploying a person to clean and wipe down every single one and sanitize every single one of those bins, there's technology out there that's being proposed to basically run a bin through one of these UVC systems to disinfect and get rid of the COVID-19 virus. We worked really closely with science and technology to determine what the efficacy of the UVC light is, and it turns out that at a certain dosage, at a certain distance, that UVC is extremely effective in eliminating 99.9% of the COVID-19.
I never miss an opportunity to make a bad pun, and it sounds like you guys are really shining a light on that COVID-19 problem there with the bins.
Absolutely.
I have one or two other questions here, and then we'll wrap it up. But you mentioned this when you were sort of introducing your office about with the COVID task force having buy-in from leadership, but then also you guys had to put out procurements pretty rapidly, and you're able to do that. I wonder if you can discuss whether or not you're making use of these other transaction authority methods that are available to TSA, or how are you able to buy so quickly when you need to?
Yeah, so we use the other transactional agreement authority with regards to sanitizing the checkpoints across 450 airports. We entered into OTAs with a number of airport authorities in order to reimburse them for cleaning. So what they would do is just modify their janitorial services contracts, and we would reimburse them for the cleaning. Another interesting authority that we've gotten, and it's very effective for airports who want that innovation quicker than maybe the government can provide, and that's we've established a process where airports can gift innovative technologies to us, and so they can gift them to us. We quickly work with them to deploy those technologies, and then in the out years, we'll pick up the maintenance for those technologies. So a lot of airports have taken advantage of that. A lot of airlines have also worked with us on that as well. And it's really an effective way to partner on an objective that the airport's got for innovation.
Gotcha. Those are lessons, I think, or at least situations where other agencies could perhaps learn a little bit, and how you guys have moved rapidly on that front. One sort of closing question is, so presumably we'll get past the worst of this pandemic, hopefully sooner rather than later. And at some point, your your number of passengers a day is going to go back up probably to where it was or close to it. Do you anticipate a lot of the changes that you guys have made, especially around COVID-19 and implementing some technologies to live beyond this pandemic and sort of become part of the experience that every passenger is going to experience going through TSA?
Yeah, absolutely. When we set out and implemented a lot of the stuff that we did in response to COVID, we definitely thought about, is this something that is going to be enduring? And I do think, what we've done in creating a more socially distanced, cleaner environment is something that the American public's not going to want to give up. And so a lot of the stuff that we put in place is going to last, and it's just going to be the new way that we screen passengers.
It really feels to me like another example where, the pandemic has been totally awful and affected the American people in so many negative ways, but there have been pockets of really positive response at the government level, whether it's at the Defense Department expanding its telework operations and even across civilian government too. We're still getting the job done and meeting mission demands despite everything else. I think, Melissa, that's about all the time we have today. But, before we close, I want to thank you for your time and efforts and sharing your work with us today. And thanks to our underwriter, Tableau, again, for underwriting this conversation series. Hope everyone stays safe and has a great week.
Thanks so much for having me.